I started trading futures roughly half a year ago, and this was my very first account. Pretty much paid only 35 bucks because there was some sales and get me to $1,000 payout. It was eventually 28 times the revenue, or basically the risk, which in my eyes it's really great return on the investment. Unfortunately, I cannot show more data because the funding ticks shut down, so rest in peace. A little bit shame because I start scaling. Now I have to look into different options. By the way, let me share a little bit journey how I basically got into trading the futures, because I'm trading CFDs for a fair few years already. I didn't plan to start trading futures, but the deal was basically really insane, so I just wanted to give it a shot. So as you can see, my very first 3 weeks, I was just testing the water, messing around with the sizing and basically placing the limits order, things like that. So I was just testing some micros which perfectly reflect my PNL in the first 3 weeks. This was basically the period where I was trying to develop a specific trading system or refining my edge specifically for the NQ. Basically last week before the monthly expiration, I went basically all in and traded setup with the size, which eventually got me into this $2,500, which was needed to pass the account. Basically the next following month I started trading consistently, but also because of the goals and the rules to get the payout and consistency, all that very annoying rules that, to be honest, I wasn't get used to comparing trading CFDs. So I had to lower the size and be a little bit more consistent. Basically rest is the history. Simply put, this is my personal observation of NQ, basically NQ trades, if you will. Even though at very first time NQ seems to be a very annoying and really fast, basically quick move to the upside downside, it felt a little bit hectic at first, but then I found that it's actually surprisingly repeatable despite its choppiness and volatility. Most of the times you can eventually predict how far we're gonna extend to a certain degree. So even though I have no idea how far we're gonna go, it actually respect at certain levels really well. Also, another thing what I notice, it's usually in the first 45-minute window, it's where the most volume are, or basically the most meaningful price action. What I'm trying to say here, this is basically your very sweet spot, at least to me personally, because usually what happen after, it's not as, I would say, good enough for me to trade, because it usually takes a lot of time to do something, or basically price is not moving anywhere. From my experience, it usually run on specific low or the highs, basically any kind of very important level. And after a specific level is being purged, it usually seek another very important key level. And to be fair, that's pretty much all you need to do in order to trade successfully NQ. So basically, here's my approach. So as I already mentioned, I usually focus on very first few minutes of the New York Open, usually where the most volatility are. And based on my previous video where I basically backtest the signal hundreds of times, it usually tends to be a rather reliable signal most of the time. So usually what I like to do is take a signal that kind of makes sense to me. If I see that we having some really strong impulse to the downside with my signal, I usually have two options. If I'm not feeling really confident in the very first signal, basically first 3 minutes in the market or at the open, I usually tend to skip and waiting for a little bit more clean price action to give me that additional confirmation. But now when I'm having a little bit more data, I'm willing to take some risk on the first signal. Also, if I see that this candle is basically 53 pips, I like to use my ATR value, usually roughly 2 times the value, or basically the middle point. So I would have my template roughly around 25 points. And basically going for 1-to-1 right here kind of makes sense also because we're having this really important level. So seeing such a huge move to the downside, it actually makes sense that we should at least basically going for the lows. And hey, we might gonna continue down, but we could also reverse basically from this level. So this could be my 1-to-1 right here, and let's say that we would also test 1.5 risk to reward ratio, and in this case both targets has been met. Really beautiful fast paced momentum trade, and by this time I would be pretty much done for the day, especially if I would take 1.5 risk to reward ratio. But we can have a look what happened basically after. So again, we got some important level and we having this really nice V shape. Eventually, I would also consider, if I'm still having my time window, which is roughly 30-45 minutes at the open, I could be eventually looking for some potential push to the upside because there is a very important high. So again, I'm seeing another momentum to the upside even though we actually swept the highs. This actually looks like a really strong signal. So again, I could take another trade right here. I will use roughly 45 points as my stop loss, which actually perfectly aligned with this candle. And again, going for basically 1-to-1, especially because I'm already having one beautiful trade. And this is pretty much it. At this point, I don't care about what's going to happen next. I'm having 2 out of 2 for the day. There is literally no point for me to trading any longer, especially if I'm seeing another 2 signals that basically is a little bit more tight, and also at the same time a really tiny candles. So I'm seeing some initial momentum or the volume to push price higher, but I don't see that initial follow through. We could easily start ranging for a while, and just to get additional 0.5 risk to reward ratio, it's not worth my time. And as we're seeing here, we actually got that initial pullback, which this was basically a really great signal to be a little bit more cautious and not be too much greedy and just going for the 1 hour trade. Obviously, not every single day is gonna be as beautiful, because even though this is a pretty significant way how to trade with the scalp and Q, some days will be really beautiful and some days is just simply gonna be a little bit more troublesome. But overall, this is something that I found to be a very reliable over time, and I would say it fits perfectly to trading my futures accounts.